Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Royce, and I have the privilege of serving as the director for the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships here at the Department of Health and Human Services. We are so glad you've joined us today for our web presentation, Creating a Culture of Compassion and Action in Response to the Opioid Epidemic, with our very special guests, both speaking to us from Orange County, California, Kay Warren of Saddleback Church, and Marla Kaufman, who leads the Jewish Addiction Awareness Network. We look forward to introducing them in just a moment. The Partnership Center, as we're known, works to support faith and community leaders by sharing timely information, models of community-based practice, and resources that we hope will strengthen their response to public health initiatives and public health crises, such as the opioid epidemic in our midst. With that mission in mind, today's webinar is the second in our 2018 series of webinars featuring community leaders talking about the innovative and promising practices they are implementing across the country in response to the crisis of opioid addiction and the need to support those struggling with substance use disorders. Our conversation today will focus on how faith communities are extending compassion and support to individuals and their families while increasing awareness and reducing the prejudice that can often be associated with addiction. Increasing awareness is one of the 6 strategies outlined in the Partnership Center's Practical Toolkit, which may be found on the Partnership Center's website, hhs.gov/partnerships. If you're not already on our mailing list, please send your contact information to us at partnerships@hhs.gov. And we'll put that email address and the website URL in the chat box now. I want to personally thank our speakers today for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their stories, their insights, and experiences with community leaders across the country, and to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy day to learn more how to bring hope and healing to your community. And now I'll turn it over to Heidi Christensen of our team here at the Partnership Center to address a few housekeeping notes and introduce our speakers. Heidi?
Thank you, Shannon. We do have an exciting and hopeful conversation to look forward to today. But first, a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is an educational webinar, off the record and not intended for press purposes. So if you are a member of the press, we will be happy to connect you to the press office here at HHS after the program. And we do have a full program today, but welcome your questions and comments throughout the webinar. We hope to share as many as possible with our presenters during the brief Q&A near the end of the program, so please send them along. Also, if you are having difficulty with your audio, you may find it helpful to call into the number on your screen rather than listen through your computer. We've just found that sometimes that just works better for sound quality. And as a final note, we will be sending a link to a recording of today's webinar and a follow-up email to everyone who has registered. On average, 115 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. In 2016, over 11 million Americans misused prescription opioids, nearly 1 million used heroin, and 2.1 million had an opioid use disorder due to the prescription opioids or heroin. Too many of our friends, family, and community members are being lost to this epidemic. But while it can easily look like a downward spiral, communities are responding with hopeful and promising practices that are saving lives, connecting people to treatment and recovery programs, and supporting folks on the long road to recovery. They are protecting future generations from harm with preventive efforts that are building the resilience of our younger generations. Now, the Partnership Center's Opioid Epidemic Practical Toolkit was inspired and informed by these wise and experienced practitioners. And today, we will hear from two of them as we explore how to increase awareness by educating community members with the information they need to understand addiction as a treatable disease that requires the support and compassion of their community. I am delighted and privileged to introduce our presenters today. Marla Kaufman is the Executive Director and founder of Jewish Addiction Awareness Network, or JAN, an organization focused on increasing the understanding of the disease of addiction and reducing the prejudice that can be associated with it within the Jewish community. She is also the chair of the Orange County Jewish Substance Abuse Task Force of Jewish Federation and Family Services. Marla serves on the advisory board of the Bat Mikvah Wilderness Therapy, a wilderness-based recovery and treatment program for Jewish young adults. Marla will be followed today by Kay Warren, who many of you know may know that has co-founded the Saddleback Church with her husband, Rick Warren, in Lake Forest, California. She is a passionate Bible teacher and respected advocate for people living with mental illness, orphaned and vulnerable children, as well as those living with HIV and AIDS. She founded Saddleback's HIV and AIDS initiative. Kay has authored several books, including Sacred Privilege, Your Life and Ministry as a Pastor's Wife, Choose Joy Because Happiness Isn't Enough, and Say Yes to God. Marla and Kay, we are so very grateful to you both for your willingness to be with us today, and we are so very eager to learn how to best open the hearts, minds, and resources of our communities to those who need them most. Marla, we'll start by opening the mic to you.
Okay. Can everyone see my slides, or are they not up yet? Ben, are the slides up?
Marla, I don't see them just yet. Can you make sure you accept that request to show your slides?
I'm not seeing the request. Do you want to go ahead and run the slides for me?
Yeah, I'll take care of that for you. One second.
Okay, great. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Heidi. It's an honor to participate in this webinar and share with everyone a little bit about our family's journey and the work of Jewish Addiction Awareness Network, or JAN for short. I'm also looking forward to learning from Kay Warren in the second part of this webinar. I'm going to leave this title slide up for a few minutes while I share from my heart. I'll start by saying that I haven't met anyone who woke up one day and said to themselves, I think I'll devote my life to addiction and recovery awareness and advocacy. Most of the people doing this work in faith communities and other nonprofits have a story and feel that they received a calling. I'm going to share the brief version of our story. Nearly 12 years ago, we discovered that our older son, then 16, had been abusing alcohol and drugs. Our family's life changed in an instant. I remember thinking over and over again, how could this happen? Being loving and diligent parents to our sons had always been our first priority, yet we started to doubt ourselves. Surely we did something very wrong for things to go so haywire. No parents are perfect, and we never claim to get it right all the time, but we couldn't put our finger on anything that would cause this. We now know that we didn't cause our sons' addiction struggles, that substance use disorder can happen to anybody from any family. I call it the equal opportunity destroyer. But in the beginning, we were uneducated, blissfully ignorant about the murky waters of addiction when we were thrown into the deep end. We didn't know it was a chronic brain disease. We didn't know all the behaviors and symptoms that come with it. We didn't know how tenacious its grip could be. We didn't know how much or how long our son could suffer. We didn't know how often our hearts would break over the coming years. We also didn't know how much we would learn, how strong we would have to be, or how strong we could be, or that eventually we would be one of so many families afflicted by this malady. And we didn't fully understand the spiritual nature of addiction that Rabbi Shays Taub describes in his book, God of Our Understanding, Jewish Spirituality and Recovery from Addiction. Rabbi Taub says, quote, Addiction is idol worship in the most fundamental sense of the term, turning to something other than God to do for you what only God can do. Before I go any further, I'm happy to share that after many ups and downs, our son is actively in recovery and reclaiming his life one day at a time. And we too are recovering as a family, but this progress was a long time coming. And I also know that for today, we're one of the fortunate families. I know this because I've sat across from several parents who have buried their teenage or young adult children. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, approximately 64,000 Americans died of an overdose in 2016. We are in the middle of a deadly and growing epidemic, one that has opioid use, both prescription and illegal opioids, clearly at the center. Then slide 2, please. This is a quote from journalist and author Stephen Fried that speaks to the challenge many of our faith communities face. Fried says, "It has proved nearly impossible to get most communities, or frankly most families, to view mental illness and addiction as daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, lifelong realities and medical illnesses. It is stunningly difficult." As active members of our Jewish community, we looked to our community for guidance, support, and acceptance when things began to unravel. And while some were supportive, including our rabbi at the time, we discovered that addiction is often seen as a stigma, something to be ashamed of, denied, and avoided. When our family started our journey in 2006, and for many years after, our Jewish community offered no Jewish-centric resources for those grappling with addiction or living a life in recovery. As we searched for help and answers, we felt isolated from our community, becoming less involved for a few years. We learned that other than in a few places like Los Angeles that has Beit Tshuva, a Jewish treatment center and synagogue community, and Chicago that has the Jewish Center for Addiction, and Atlanta that has HAMSA, an acronym for Helping Atlantans Manage Substance Abuse, our community was not unique in lacking programming in this area. That all changed in the spring of 2015 when I read a book by Rabbi Paul Steinberg called Recovery, the 12 Steps in Jewish Spirituality. Rabbi Steinberg is in recovery himself, and his book aligns Jewish concepts with 12-step recovery ideas and practices. In the book, he says, quote, "My Judaism is not separate from my addiction and recovery, but integrated into it. When I read those words, I knew God had a plan for me, and that plan was to promote awareness and decrease stigma around this disease, with particular emphasis on the Jewish community." Ben, slide 3. My work began locally. As I shared our family's situation, others joined the effort. Our Jewish community in Orange County, California went from no programming to offering a wide range of ongoing programs and is now a model for other Jewish communities across the nation. I'm so proud of our community. We've found that community-wide collaboration is what works best, and that includes building partnerships. We have partnerships here between the clergy, the lay leaders, and Jewish agencies. We've made a commitment to consistent efforts in programming, and we support everything that we do by publicizing events across congregations and community organizations. It's a true collaboration. Ben, slide 4. I want to share with you our community's evolution. My first step was to peer facilitate a book study on Rabbi Steinberg's book in our living room. For 6 weeks, 10 people came to our home every Wednesday night to discuss the readings, share their pain, talk about their experience and growth, and help each other heal. My next project was to start an Al-Anon meeting at a synagogue. This became the first recovery meeting to meet in a Jewish space in our county, and it's still thriving today. To recruit participants to the book study and publicize the Al-Anon meeting, I contacted several rabbis as well as the clinical director at our Jewish Federation and Family Services. The clinical director had previously interned and worked at treatment programs. The two of us clicked, and we decided to join forces. That's when we started building momentum and creating a structure to address substance use disorder and recovery in our community on an ongoing basis. We made a presentation to the Board of Rabbis. We asked them to help us and told them we'd be getting back to them to ask each of them to appoint someone from their congregation to serve on the Jewish Substance Abuse Task Force we were going to establish. Next slide. This is a little bit about our Jewish Substance Abuse Task Force. It's a cross-denominational task force that addresses addiction in our community. We have 17 members from 15 congregations. Members serve as ambassadors of recovery and a bridge between their congregations and what we're doing community-wide on addiction recovery. We meet quarterly at the Jewish Federation of Family Services offices, and we have staff support from the clinical director. Next slide, please. These are the goals of our task force: to spread awareness and knowledge, to reduce shame and stigma, make congregations safe places, establish 12-step and recovery meetings in Jewish spaces, and initiate education and prevention events. Next slide. These are tangible results that you just couldn't be prouder of these results. Right now, there's an Al-Anon meeting and an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that are held in 2 different synagogues, with plans to establish 2 more recovery meetings in other locations later this year. Our Serenity Shabbat or Sabbath services are held quarterly and move around from congregation to congregation. These services focus on addiction awareness and the wisdom of Jewish tradition as it relates to the spiritual practice of recovery. There are so many moving experiences that have happened at these services, and I'll share a few of them now. At the start of one service, the rabbi invited anyone affected by addiction directly or through a family member or friend to come up to light and bless the Sabbath candles. At first, only a handful of people rose from their seats, but then more and more people got up and gathered around the candles. About half those in the sanctuary eventually joined in. It was very healing to stand up, not be ashamed, and be given an honor in recognition of the challenges of being affected by this disease. During another Serenity Shabbat, a local treatment center brought 2 Jewish inpatient clients to the service. One of them was so moved by being reconnected to his faith and having addiction addressed compassionately and openly that he wept when speaking to the rabbi. And one last story. At one service, when it was time to say the mourner's prayer called the Kaddish, a father emotionally told the congregation that he was saying the prayer in memory of his son who died from complications of alcoholism just a few months before. At every one of these services, people seek us out after to tell us there is someone they are worried about in their family, or that they lost someone in their family, or that they themselves are in recovery. And all of them say how thankful they are that this issue is being talked about and focused on through a Jewish spiritual lens. We also received 2 grants from our local Jewish Community Foundation. The first one was to hold a comprehensive clergy and educators workshop on addiction. The workshop, which was almost a full day, included personal stories as well as sessions on understanding addiction as a disease, text study, spiritual counseling, and brainstorming on programming solutions. Jan has brought this workshop to other communities, including Atlanta and Houston. The second grant was awarded to provide addiction recovery book sets to all synagogue libraries. The collection includes 4 12-step books and 6 books written by clergy across Jewish denominations that directly address addiction and recovery. We personally present the book sets at services along with bookmarks that include facts about substance use disorder. Congregants can check the books out, and clergy can use them as resource material when writing sermons or teaching classes on addiction and recovery. Just having the books on site demonstrates that the synagogue is a safe place to come with these issues. And various congregations have been leaders in programming as well. One synagogue did a community-wide conference for parents and teens. Another synagogue is in the middle of a speaker series that they're calling Being Human. It features renowned rabbis talking about difficult subjects, including addiction. And there's also a new group that meets monthly with a rabbi in our community to discuss recovery in Judaism. Next slide, please. Just wanted to show you, this was the flyer for the Navigating Teen Challenges Conference, which was held in January of 2016. As you can see, it addressed a number of challenges that our teens and their families are facing, and that included substance use disorder. And one of the sessions we did, which I did with a clinician, was Beyond Prevention: When a Jewish Family Faces Addiction. And why I point that out is that so much is focused on prevention and so little about what happens when it's, that's over. It's not prevention time anymore. Okay, next slide, please. This slide features another quote from Stephen Fried with a great and very simple suggestion for modifying the traditional Jewish prayer for healing called the Misha Berach. Fried says, as for the spoken and sung Misha Berach, it would be powerful if rabbis used the moments before that prayer to reinforce that mental illness and substance use disorders count as medical conditions for which you can offer prayers of healing. Just repeating that idea in services could have a real impact on the community. Most of the clergy in our community are now doing this routinely. For those affected by addiction and other mental health issues, this is extremely comforting and validating. The first time I heard my rabbi include those words, tears streamed down my face. Rabbi Paul Steinberg recently composed an original Misha Berach, a prayer for healing, especially for those suffering with addiction, that I'd like to share with you. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bring blessings of compassion and healing to those who suffer from the oppression of addiction. Turn their eyes away from the seductions and cravings that crush their spirits with cruel bondage. Return them to their holy dignity and restore them to wholeness of spirit, of body, and of mind. Do not let the inclination to evil control them or lead to selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Source of mercy, send our loved ones and friends the strength of spirit to recover your great reality within and the serenity to accept your will. Open their hearts to the truth of our love, and may they awaken to your presence through mitzvot and spiritual practice. May this be your will, and may it happen right now. Amen. Find this prayer so meaningful and so beautiful. Okay, next slide. So this is just a summary of actions that make a difference in a community. Encourage clergy to deliver a sermon on addiction and not to do it at a time when there are going to be a lot of people, at services, prime time. Invite speakers on addiction to address the congregation. Let congregants know that they can come to you about addiction issues. I feel some congregants just don't know that clergy are open to listening to them and helping to direct them when they're facing this issue. Have books on addiction available and be open to hosting a recovery meeting. Okay, Ben, next slide. So I'm going to pivot here and talk about Jewish Addiction Awareness Network, which is a national community outreach organization that was inspired by the local work and wanting to bring this to other communities. Our mission is to increase the understanding of the disease of addiction and decrease stigma by connecting individuals, families, and professionals across the Jewish spectrum in order to explore the intersection of Judaism and recovery, exchange resources, and support those in crisis. Next slide. Jan has four main purposes. First, to increase awareness and understanding of addiction and the impact of this epidemic on Jewish lives, to connect Jewish families and individuals coping with addiction to vital support and resources available in their local Jewish communities, to help communities and congregations establish or increase programming around addiction and recovery, and to explore the power of Jewish knowledge and traditions in addressing addiction and recovery. And you notice in all of my talks and slides, I'm constantly saying addiction and recovery. And the reason why I don't just say addiction and I put addiction and recovery in there is that I want people to know that people do recover. This is a very treatable disease, and people can put this in remission one day at a time and live very, very fulfilling lives. So to fulfill these objectives, we're building a resource website that we anticipate going live in about 4 to 6 weeks. It will include Jewish-specific resources, general resources, and creative perspectives from clergy, mental health professionals, authors, and most importantly, from people in recovery and family members who have loved ones struggling with addiction or in recovery. We're also continuing to collaborate and connect with Jewish communities and individuals across the nation, so stigma will be shattered and replaced with hope, understanding, and compassion. I'd like to close with some wisdom from a contemporary source and then some wisdom from an ancient source. Next slide, please. Here are some powerful words from the late, great Maya Angelou, author, essayist, and poet, from her poem called Alone. Maya Angelou says, "Alone, all alone, nobody but nobody can make it out here all alone." And we don't have to walk this journey alone. We can walk this journey with others. We can walk this journey in our faith communities. Next slide. And finally, the ancient source, the ancient wisdom, a quote from Psalm 118. "Out of the narrow place I called out to God, and God answered with expansiveness." Let us all call out to God to help us be the communities of compassion, action, and healing that our world needs, and may He answer us quickly and with expansiveness. Next slide. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank the Partnership Center for this opportunity to share with you the work that our community has done and the work of Jewish Addiction Awareness Network. And I'm going to turn it back to Heidi, and I'm looking forward to learning from Kay Warren. Thank you.
Marla, thank you. What an extraordinary and just a powerful and passionate presentation. We're so thankful to you, and thank you for turning your experience and the experience of your family's journey into such a constructive and hopeful set of practices that people can emulate and take up into their own communities. And just a quick note to folks, there's a lot of people who are typing into the chat box looking for the names of the books that you mentioned and resources, and I'd say to our audience that we had asked when you registered to share your, if we could share your contact information with our community presenters today. Marla can send out an email with that information to all of those who asked to be contacted. And if you did not take that option, you can certainly send us your contact information at partnerships@hhs.gov. We will share that with Marla and Jan, and she can send you all the resources and also add you to their network. So thank you, my friend. There was a few other questions, but what we're going to do is turn now over to Kay Warren, and we're just delighted to welcome her wisdom and voice and prophetic voice to this conversation today. Kay?
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Partnership Center and to Marla, who I've discovered in this process is a neighbor. And we talked before and said, we could do lunch together. We live just down the street. So I'm amazed and thrilled that I have a new friend and someone else in partnership here with who care about people who are living with addiction and substance use disorder. I will never forget the day that my younger brother, Andy, sat me down and said, I know you're going to hate this. I know you're going to be angry with me, but I just need to tell you that I started using heroin a few months ago and I can't stop. We were sitting at the beach. He took me someplace because he didn't know how I was going to react, and it took me to a peaceful place where hopefully I would be able to hear this news. But I was just shattered that my baby brother, I'm 8 years older than he is, and for as long as I could remember, he was my sweet little baby brother and the sibling I had always longed for. And when he told me that he was now addicted to heroin, I remember being shocked, angry, confused, but mostly I was frightened. I was frightened that I could lose this dearly loved brother to an HIV infection. I worried that a violent drug dealer would harm him. Would he die by an accidental overdose? And I couldn't even talk. All I could do was, in my fear and anger, shout questions at him. I can't say that I reacted well. All I could think of was, why did you do this to yourself? Why did you do this to your family? What if we lose you? And I don't even really remember what he said in response, but what I do know is over the next several years, our family rode the roller coaster of a substance use disorder. We didn't know anything about it. We didn't understand how it could happen. We didn't understand why this was, at that moment, it felt like a terrible choice that he had made. There was so much we didn't understand, but I watched my parents suffer the bleak despair of a dearly loved child who was being wrecked by an opioid addiction. He was so handsome, and this handsome young man shrunk to a pale skeleton who lied to their faces and stole and pawned the very few prized possessions that they had, wrecked their cars, and destroyed their trust. And yet their love for him never wavered. I mean, not for a second. He was their son, their beautiful boy, and they would give their last dollar and their last prayer to see him whole and healthy again. My brother Andy is one of the lucky ones, because somewhere in that black, yawning hole of addiction, there was a tiny piece of his will that survived, and he eventually forced himself. He took himself into detox and survived the accompanying physical and mental agony, and he rebuilt his life. And today, 25 years later, he is the sweet brother of my youth. He's intelligent, warm, funny, gifted musician and a songwriter. He's a great dad. He's a loving son, and he is forever grateful to our parents for never giving up on him. And our family story has a happy ending, but as Marla said, thousands of others do not. Just a couple of days ago, I attended a grief support group at my church because I lost my son in 2013 to suicide, and another mother who was there at this grief support group shared, but her head was bowed low and shame filled her words as she told of how her daughter had died of an accidental overdose and how sorry she was that her story wasn't like the rest of the mothers sitting in that circle, because her child had OD'd. And I was struck that even in sharing her story of tragic loss with other grieving moms, the shame of her adult child dying from an overdose was just almost too much for her. Like my parents never told anyone in our church about my brother's heroin addiction, his substance use disorder. They never shared that. They were too embarrassed. Here was a mother, all these years later, hanging her head in shame because her child had OD'd. Breaks my heart. And even though there does seem to be an increased awareness and understanding that addiction is a medical condition, former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy says, we also need a cultural shift in how we think about addiction. For far too long, too many in our country have viewed addiction as a moral failing. We must help everyone see that addiction is not a character flaw. It is a chronic illness that we must approach with the same skill and compassion with which we approach heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. For me, as a person of faith, there's good news here, because the good news is that the faith community can play a key role in supporting those in crisis, dispelling the stigma and the shame, and provide practical help and hope for those with a substance use disorder. In fact, being part of a faith community is recognized as being one of the protective factors that helps people avoid substance use to begin with. Well, how? Well, according to a 2008 American Religious Identification Survey, there are roughly 350,000 religious congregations in the United States. They are found in the tiniest hollow in Appalachia, in the vast labyrinths of our largest cities, and in the small towns that dot our landscape. Churches, and I'm a Christian, so I'll use that term because it's the one I'm most familiar with, but you can substitute mosque or synagogue. Churches, mosques, synagogues are islands of stability. That's a physics term, but it's such a great description of what the faith community contributes. Because in our ever-changing, ever-shifting existence, church and faith remain a stable and dependable source of strength. Churches are in every community. They are ubiquitous, and they stay. They remain long after perhaps a government agency or even an NGO closes a program. The faith community remains. So how do faith and spirituality serve as protective factors against substance abuse? Well, we're not just bodies. Almost everyone agrees that we are material and immaterial beings, and we need care and nurture on both of those levels to survive and to thrive. And I have 5 things that I can think of that the faith community at its best provides. And the first is the faith community can provide a significant connection to God. Obviously, you don't have to go to church to have a relationship to God, but it helps. Being there in a place of worship, in a place where there is an opportunity to share faith, to build faith, can give a person a sense of significance and purpose. Then the faith community can contribute meaningful relationships that are built on shared beliefs, shared values, and shared goals. I think one of the beauties of the faith community when it's working at its best is that it provides bonds that extend beyond tribe. They're unifying relationships that we, as a Christian, I can visualize some of these relationships as lasting into eternity. They're much deeper than the fragile political or social alliances that fracture at the first sign of difference or difficulty. The relationships that are formed in a faith community give a sense of belonging, a sense of place. And that's probably one of the most powerful parts of being a protective factor, one of the contributions that a faith community can make. The third thing that I can think of that a faith community can contribute in providing a protective factor is that it is an impetus for and instruction in personal growth and maturity. When you are in a faith community on a regular basis and you're building meaningful relationships, you're going to be with other people who also want to be the best person they can be. And that provides the impetus to change, to want to grow, to be a better person than you are today. It provides the courage that you need to make hard changes in your life and in any area. It could be in your marriage, it could be in your friendships, it could be in your career. But when you're in a place where there are other people who are also seeking to grow and mature, that allows personal growth to start to happen. And then 4 is to challenge. The faith community can provide a challenge to connect with the wider community through service. It is a place that pushes us to look outside of our own problems, to look outside of our own needs, to look outside of our own lives, to connect into the community to see how we can serve. And then the last thing I would say as how it provides this protective factor for us is that there's comfort and solace available during a crisis. When the wheels fall off the bus and everything comes crashing down in our lives, maybe when our job or career, when they're unsatisfactory, when marriage falls apart, when someone dies, when substance misuse becomes substance abuse or addiction, we all need to be surrounded by love. And if you're already connected in a faith community where you have sought that spiritual input, where you've developed meaningful relationships, where you're surrounded by other people who also want to grow, where you know that part of your life's mission and purpose is to care for other people, and it pushes you back out into the community. Then when you face a tragedy of your own, or when you face a loss, or you face a situation that you don't even know what to do, you have already built in that structure, that place where you can receive comfort and solace. I believe we get well in community. So in the few minutes that I have left, I want to just share with you an acrostic using the word church. You could substitute, if you're a Muslim, you can substitute masjid. If you're Jewish, you can substitute synagogue. You can make your acrostic really long. But with the word church, I want to suggest some simple, practical action steps that every faith congregation can take that will offer assistance in recovery from substance abuse disorder or addiction. So the church strategy, the C in church, the first C is to care for and support those with mental illness and substance use disorders. I mean, the ways that we can care for and show support is really endless, from support groups to recovery groups, to divorce recovery, to grief share, to mental health groups, to offering pastoral care. And probably one of the places that I am the most proud is you could offer a Celebrate Recovery program in your church. CelebrateRecovery.com, celebraterecovery.org. If you go there, you can learn all about it. But it is an amazing program that's been in existence for about 25 years. and it's a Christian 12-step program. It brings hope to people with their hurts, habits, and hang-ups. About 4 million people have already completed what's called a STEP study. It's used currently in 42 state prisons and in 30,000 churches. It has literally saved thousands of lives. And it's a very simple process. It is life-changing. But it starts with having a heart of compassion. I mean, anything else that we would want to do, anything else that a church could offer has to start from that place of compassion, making a decision that we're going to be a place that cares for and supports those who have a mental illness or a substance use disorder. We're going to support the individual and we're going to support the family. Sometimes people say, well, we don't have the money. You know, we're not a very big church. We're not a very big congregation. We don't really have the money to do that. And I always have to ask the question, how much money does it cost to care? How much money does it cost to have a heart of compassion for those who are suffering? If we think that money is going to be the obstacle, then there'll always be a reason not to reach out to those who are in pain, not to reach out to those who are living with a substance use disorder. But when you start from the place of, I can develop a heart of compassion in myself, and collectively we in this place, in this community of faith, we've decided that we're going to care and support people in pain, then that's when change actually begins to happen. So it's really not about money. It's about developing a heart of compassion. In the 2016 Surgeon General's report on alcohol, drugs, and health, it states that mutual aid groups, which Celebrate Recovery and the Jewish Addiction Network that Marla was talking about, fit into that category. Mutual aid groups and newly emerging recovery support programs and organizations are a key part of the system of continuing care for substance use disorders in the United States. It's recognized that these programs are powerful aids in recovery from addiction. And then the first H is to offer practical assistance. I mean, this sounds so simple and so almost like ridiculously simple, but when people are in crisis, when they're experiencing cancer or someone in their family dies, most of the time faith communities will rally around those folks and provide meals and provide transportation and do all sorts of really kind and helpful things. But when someone has a substance use disorder or someone is living with a mental illness, it is often we don't do that. We don't offer that same kind of care and practical needs. And that's one of the ways we can help each other get well. The U is to utilize volunteers. Again, every congregation has dozens, if not hundreds, of people who are looking for ways to make a significant contribution with their lives, to use their own life experiences to help other people grow or recover. And so again, rather than thinking of, well, this is an expensive program, this is going to require staff, this is going to require people or professionals to do this. No, turn your eye toward the volunteers who are sitting in your congregation, offer them meaningful ways to engage, offer them some training, and then let them be the ones that actually run these kind of programs. R is to remove the stigma. Probably, hands down, the most powerful thing that any faith congregation can do in the opioid crisis, because church should be the safest place on earth. It should be the one place that you can count on when you're broken. It's the one place in this very judgmental and harsh world where you can bring your real self, not your perfect self. And with that in mind, we can brick by brick knock down the wall of misperceptions and myths, shame and stigma that surround mental illness, suicide, substance use disorder, because the stigma around suicide and substance use disorder is fierce. And unfortunately, if we were going to be really honest, religion in general has contributed to the myths and the stereotypes and the shame-based messages. But we don't have to stay there. And I really believe that there are some positive changes occurring in the faith community as we learn more about the brain and we learn about mental illness and we learn about substance misuse disorder as a medical condition. And Marla mentioned this, and I would highly reinforce this. Talk about it from the pulpit. talk about substance use disorder, talk about the opioid addiction, talk about mental illness. There is something that happens when someone in authority mentions a taboo, when someone in authority mentions positively and speaks of these kinds of things with compassion rather than judgment. Have people who have lived experience. Either they're recovering from a substance use disorder, or they're a family member, or maybe they've lost someone and their story is so painful. But bring those folks up front and let them tell their story, because when we put a name and a face to an illness, our judgment disappears. When we only see it as people outside of ourselves, someone different from us, that could never happen in my family, that could never happen to me, we're going to operate out of a place of judgment. But when we put a name and a face, suddenly our hearts open up and we're so much more willing to say, whoa, you're just like me. You're just like me. You're just like my family. And we don't feel so alone. And that breaks the stigma and the shame. And again, I just really encourage starting a Celebrate Recovery, because these Christian 12-step programs that incorporate faith, that bring faith into the center of recovery, have proven to be effective ways to help people stay in recovery. The second C in the acrostic is to collaborate with the community. Your congregation may not know much about substance use disorder, may not know anything other than really what you see on television or in a movie, or what your own stereotype is. But there are so many who know, who are experts, who have learned, who understand, who can educate your community. So collaborate with the community. Bring those folks who are experts into your faith community. Let them share what they know. Let them educate and inform your congregation, and form partnerships with them. Let the faith community do what it does best, and then leverage what others in the community who are experts in this field. Bring those two together in such a way that there is momentum that's gained from that collaboration. And then the last H is to offer hope. I mean, sadly, the government has a limited ability to offer hope, and the medical profession has a limited ability to offer hope. But this is in the charter of the faith community. This is what we do best. We are hope dispensers. And when we in the faith community go back into our community with a message of, hey, you are struggling, we are here. We can offer you hope. We can offer you hope that you're going to be listened to. You're going to be cared for. You're going to be offered practical assistance, a knowledgeable staff who can help connect you to the city or county resources that you need, that we're going to reassure you that you're not alone. Whether you get well, fully recover, get better, successfully manage your life or not, you are not alone. We're here and we will walk with you. And I would just say in closing, again, there will just never be enough money for all the programs that we need to fight the opioid crisis, and there will never be enough professionals. There are going to be some gaps. So rather than be frightened by that or even dismayed by that, understand that that is a perfect place for the faith community to engage and for us to show up and do what we do best. And so anyone who's listening to this, maybe with a skeptical ear, I would say, please don't write off the church or the faith community. And when you're dreaming of solutions, go to the church, ask them to bring their knowledge and their skills and their expertise to the table, knowing that they can offer hope like nobody else can. And if you happen to be somebody who's in crisis as you are watching this or listening to this, or you love someone who's in crisis, I would just say consider going back to church, go back to synagogue this weekend. When you see that your life and even your pain matters, you can hold on. And when you see meaning even in suffering, you can endure. There is nothing greater than faith and spirituality to be a protective factor. And I think the bottom line reason is because it can't be taken away. Human bonds break. Health escapes us. Wealth may wax and wane, but an internal connection to an eternal God protects your spirit from the despair that haunts all of us at times. I would just close with this. We all struggle. Please don't struggle alone.
Well, I think you're hearing a resounding amen across the country, Kay. Thank you for that powerful and impassioned presentation, and thank you for your frankness and very practical ways to move through your thinking. It's sometimes we think that hope may be a ephemeral concept or to embrace, but that was a very practical approach for being, as you said, hope. We love that. Hope dispensers. So thank you for that. That was just terrific. Hey, listen, a couple things. First, I want to say to folks out there, yes, the slide that talks about Celebrate Recovery, it is celebraterecovery.com. So we're getting a lot of people who are, that's okay, they're Googling like crazy and going, hey, I can't find it. So it's celebraterecovery.com. And we also, and this will be interesting to both you and Marla, we've gotten a couple of comments in the chat box about, well, what if I'm not a faith-based community? I'm a secular community, or a community that's not predominantly gathered around worship. What do I do? And I know what came from me is that I started listening for an ear in both of your presentations on what were the universal concepts. And you really, and I'd love for you to add to this, but I thought about, talk about it. How out loud is your conversation about recovery in your community? If you're a fitness or a youth serving organization, are your support groups, for instance, on the same calendar as your fitness schedule or your PTA meetings? Do you know that community recognition, the bookmarks that Marla had mentioned, just a visual, that's something that gets handed out that has immediate connection to support. How are you working with your volunteers, peer folks, people who are in recovery who could also be extensions of help and wellness and connection to recovery, partnerships, community collaborations? What else comes to your mind when you just think of what are the basic principles of how we are connecting people, creating compassion in our communities and connecting people to the support they need?
Go ahead, Marla, if you'd like.
Okay, well, the one thing I feel about substance use disorder and going into recovery is that it equalizes everybody. When I go into a recovery meeting, it doesn't matter what religion the person is, doesn't matter if it's different than me, what race the person is, what socioeconomic status the person has. When we're in there talking about recovery, when I'm in, I'm a member of Al-Anon, when I'm in an Al-Anon meeting, all those things just disappear, all those falsehoods, and we get down to our raw humanness and all of our commonalities. And I know that recovery programs based on faith and spirituality are difficult for some people. And I know in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a chapter to the atheist or the agnostic. And I think it's just, looking for something outside of yourself. Our best thinking, when it's just an internal going around and around, doesn't get us anywhere. So when people have trouble with that higher power concept or God concept or spirituality, I know in AA they have an acronym that helps some of those people for God, G-O-D, group of drunks. So if it's just people outside of you that have knowledge, professional medical people, people who could share what they felt going through this as a family member who loves somebody or as a person in recovery themselves, I think that that's key to try to push away the differences, the challenges that we might have with certain spiritual concepts, and get down to talking about it, being educated about it, spreading knowledge, and certainly, as Kay really illuminated in her talk, the caring. The caring is what matters, and everybody can do that, no matter what their faith is or if they are struggling with faith. It's a very isolating disease for families and individuals, and that's really the bottom line that we have to look for.
I would agree with that, and I think that probably even those who don't come from a faith perspective would agree that we as human beings have we have a physical essence and we have a spiritual essence, in the sense that there's a part of me that you can't see or touch. But it is that part of me that there's the body, there's the physical part that may develop a medical condition that I'm addicted. My body is now dependent and must have a drug. That's the body part of me. But if we just try to heal the body without also healing the immaterial part of us, whether you call that a spirit or whatever your terminology is, at some point you have to deal with that part of who you are. And you may be a part of a recovery group that doesn't involve faith, and that's fine. I agree with Marla. At the end of the day, there is the sense of, I can't do this alone. And so it's that reaching out for help. It's that reaching out that says, I need to be around caring and skilled people who can help me get through this.
Very well said, both of you. Thank you for that. And we do know that a supportive community is essential to recovery. And just a note to people who are calling in about, writing in about specific programs, the Partnership Center, our webinar last month, we sent out a follow-up email that contained links to just an enormous variety of mutual aid support groups. So if anyone is interested in receiving that, please do contact us at partnerships@hhs.gov, and we'd be happy to share that with you. And so getting back into, in the brief time we have left, this is sort of we've heard it too often in painful ways. It's come in a few questions in the chat box, just echoing that idea of we're in a community that believes that this issue can be prayed away. Mm-hmm. And I know each of you will have a very interesting, we'd love to hear from you on that.
Go ahead, Kay, you start out.
Okay,
I have
you start us on this one.
Let's hear your opinion.
Good luck with that. I mean, could I say that I've probably heard a few stories, in my life of people who prayed and everything instantly in that moment changed, and they no longer, smoked or drank too much, or I could say I've heard a few of those stories, but it's not normative. It's not the way it typically works. Typically, we have to work with our body and our spirit, and it's a long process, and we need each other.
I totally agree with that. I call those people the one-steppers. I don't believe in the one step, and I think that this disease needs to be addressed from all kinds of ways. It's biological, it's psychological, it's social, and it's spiritual, in my opinion. I think all of those need to be addressed, and this has been deemed an illness, a disease. It's in the DSM guide as a mental health issue. The American Medical Association says it's a disease. We don't just pray away cancer, most of us. We go for medical help. So, and one of the reasons why I think spirituality is so important for people suffering from this disease is that if you weren't having a spiritual crisis before, the disease of addiction can take you to a place where you do things. Kay described it in her brother, how he treated her parents, and we experienced the same thing. This person who you raised, is lying to you, stealing from you, hurting you, and speaking to you in ways that you just can't believe. And I think the disease makes them act against their own moral compass, and that, I think, very often the spiritual answer to come back from that is what helps the most.
Thank you. Well, I think that was beautifully said. And now we have another new term, the one-stepper. The one-steppers. That was great. Thank you both for the new vocabulary. I'm going to lift it up into Samson's new style guide for sure this afternoon. That was great. Well, listen, and I know I would just love, and just on, because we've gotten a few comments about it, just way back to the introduction. Marla, you're working, what's the wilderness recovery, wilderness recovery therapy?
Okay.
You're on the board of. Can you say that in a minute, or is that too much?
Sure.
I
can talk about it. I'm so glad that you asked. Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy is the first Jewish-focused wilderness program in the country. It serves young adults 18 to about 26. And for anyone who's not familiar with wilderness therapy, it really gets people away from all of the triggers and through nature-based experiences allows people to heal. And this program is under the auspices of Camp Ramah of the Rockies, and it's outside of Denver. And in fact, they just welcomed their first clients last month. It's a brand new program, and I can't say enough about it. I'm on the advisory board. They're clinically sophisticated, very caring. really on top of things. And my own son went to a wilderness program, when he was 16 going on 17, and it was very powerful. And I wish that we had had a Jewish option at the time. Of course, he was under 18, so this program wouldn't be appropriate. So if you don't know a lot about wilderness therapy, please educate yourself about it and go to Bamidbar's Wilderness Therapy Program and check it out. It's a really good start. I will say when
or
people
reach out to you.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And when people go for treatment, I just want to say this last thing, and then they say it doesn't work, because my son's been in a few treatment programs. I never think any treatment is wasted. It builds upon itself. It's in there, and they have a base to go back in which to build from. So please don't get discouraged if your loved one goes for treatment and instantly it doesn't work. It can take time.
Well, thank you for that. That was a beautiful way to wrap our time, at least today, together. I want to thank both of our presenters today, Marla Kaufman and Kay Warren. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing just your sheer wisdom and experience with the nation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Now, folks, remember, we are sending a recording out of today's presentation to everyone who registered. So if you're listening with more than one person, please just let us know. We're happy to send that recording out to anyone by just emailing us at partnerships@hhs.gov. Please stay tuned. We will be promoting our webinar in March coming up. This webinar was part of a series of webinars featuring the innovative and promising practices happening in diverse communities around the country. Again, thank you so much to both Marla and Kay, and a sincere thanks to each of you for your participation and for all that you do to bring hope and healing in your community. Thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much. Thanks, friends.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Okay, we'll
Hello.
give you a call. Okay, thank you both. All righty. Bye-bye.
Kay, I'd love to get